For our next speaker, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Carlos Watson, who is the founder, CEO, and the editor-in-chief of Ozzy Media. Before we get going with Ozzy, we're going to play a video, but just in terms of some quick background on both Carlos and Ozzy. Ozzy is a 3-year-old new media business, and to the best of my knowledge, has grown faster than any media business ever. Pretty damn close. 15 million monthly active users. The company has created partnerships with CNN, with TED, with Wired Magazine. This summer is going to have its first Ozzy Fest in conjunction with Univision in Central Park, which will be quite a lot of fun. And also has a TV series coming out this fall, 16 for 16, based on the best political campaigns of all time. So an awful lot of action in a short period of time, and it's really driven by Carlos' incredible vision and energy. But you're going to hear more kind of how Ozzy's gotten the kind of movement and traction that they have, how they've been able to develop the audience and the addicts that they've created. But before we do that, we're going to play a quick video. Hit it. So what's new and what's next? Just to give you a little context on the 15 million monthly active users that Ozzy's been able to get, Politico, which is a pretty well-known political news site, I think has 8 million monthly active users. The Economist, been around for only about 100 years and very well respected. I think has a similarly about 8 million monthly active users. And Ozzy in 3 years since concept has 15 million monthly active users. Pretty spectacular. So Carlos, what's the secret to the success? How you been able to do it?
Let's see. It's I think a couple of things have come together for us well. I mean, some of it hard work, and I'm old enough now to recognize luck as well. So we've been lucky a bunch. I'd say I feel like the things that we've done well so far. I think we had a clear idea, and we spent a fair amount of time, as you know, thinking about exactly what we would do. In fact, we got kicked out of one office by one of our investors, not Mike, who thought we were taking too long to launch, felt like we were focused too much on things like design and really trying to get it right. So I think that was one thing that I think ultimately made a lot of sense. I think the partnerships did make a big difference. I think they made difference both in terms of introducing us to audiences, but also lending credibility. So very early on, literally from launch, we were partnering with CNN, for example, to do a segment on their morning show, CNN New Day. Or if any of you are NPR fans, they've got a wonderful show, All Things Considered, and we built a segment with them. And that was a wonderful opportunity that hardly anyone gets, and certainly you don't get right off the bat. Or the USA Today, for much of our first year and a half, kind of heroed us on their homepage. And so I think that was a piece of it. And then last but not least, I think we ended up with just and I know everyone says this or feels this in different ways, but I really feel like we ended up with a very special team, both inside and outside of the building. I think we interviewed close to 500 people to hire our first 50. I think I've interviewed people on 4 continents in the last year. To my girlfriend's disappointment, I interviewed people on our holiday break in Mexico in December. But we are constantly on the search.
She didn't care.
She actually didn't care. She was happier, is what Mike's saying. But I'm going to leave here and fly and go to New York for a day tomorrow to interview 4 people and come right back. That's how much it matters to us. And so I think that that also has been a differentiator for us. So those 3, and then a big chunk of luck, feel like the pieces that have come together so far.
So I don't want to be like our German friends and have you divulge state secrets, but as a startup company, how in the world were you able to get NPR and CNN and USA Today to have that kind of relationship right off the get-go?
Yeah, so let's see. So I think it came from a couple of different places. In the case of NPR, they had a particularly entrepreneurial both CEO and his number 2. And I think no matter how good the idea was or how hungry we had been, if those people hadn't been in place, if those change agents hadn't been there and hadn't wanted something to happen, it wouldn't have happened. And so I think we were very fortunate in the case of NPR that there were a couple of champions at the most senior levels. Because as you know, at really successful, large, complex places like that, getting any partnership off the ground is difficult. Convincing them to do it with a new company is especially difficult. And then you can imagine that there are people in the NPR building who are like, why do we need these guys, right? Like, we've got a couple thousand people. Why in the world do we need to be giving away some of our airtime to people who are new? So I think having that senior support was important. And then we nursed it. I think we probably spent 9 months on that. It started with drinks at what's the place that we all go to? Rosewood.
You go there.
Right. Never seen anybody else there, but so we started off by meeting them there, and then we made ourselves available literally whenever they wanted. So I guess, Mike, the other piece I would say is care and feeding. Made a difference. And then I think we moved back and forth with people. I would say also at the USA Today, their leader at the time, their editor-in-chief, Dave Calloway, had been at MarketWatch and CNET. And so while he was in a larger organization, he had been involved in entrepreneurial things before, and I think he was more open to working with a newer group than maybe someone whose experience set had only been working with large established companies.
So you're able to kind of get the flywheel spinning by partnering with other people in their networks and get exposure to Aussie.
Yeah.
And then, what are you doing to develop Aussie Addicts, and talk more about the Aussie Addict and why that's a priority and the focus on that?
Yeah, and if I could, I would just add one other thing that when I think back about some of these partnerships that have worked well for us, that have made a difference, is that I think we overinvest in them at the beginning, meaning that we try and make it easy for them. We're double checking, we're course correcting, we're being open to things that aren't working, and we're hearing NPR saying this process isn't working when you send it to us on Thursday and we post it on Saturday, or we're hearing the USA Today saying, I really want more of these kinds of stories, and we're quick to react. And we want to be the easiest people they can work with, because we know that at any moment they could find 12 million other people who'd be happy to be on their homepage or happy to be on CNN's morning show. So as I think about some of the things that ended up working well, I think that was a part of it. But as you're saying, we have gotten to a point where the focus has not only been on growing the overall number, but the number of people who come back repeatedly and the number of people who spread the word. And we often refer to that as addicts and evangelists. And we said that whatever any of you love, I've fallen in love with lots of different TV shows over the years, from The Wire to Homeland to you name it. And I think of myself as an addict, and worse yet, I'm often an evangelist when I like something. If I find that restaurant that works, as some people here know, I'll drag one person after another to that same place over and over again. And such
Never been to NOLA.
right. And Mike has never been anywhere near there. But so we really have focused on addicts and evangelists. One of the surprisingly good tools for us, one of the tools that people told us early on was not going to be a relevant tool and not to spend our time on, was email. And emails ended up being a terrific tool. And so when we first started 2+ years ago, email was dead, only focus on social, build up your Facebook page likes, build up your Twitter following. But as we all have seen, Facebook has the ability to turn that dial down, and Twitter hasn't proven to be as good a referrer of actual traffic. And so a place for us that's turned out to be really good is email. We have a regular relationship. We get in people's boxes, and using smart software, we're able to increasingly understand what they like. Are there certain authors they like? Are there certain kinds of stories they like? Are these people who watch video versus read pieces? Are there certain times of day? And so that, I would say, Mike, has been one of the helpful pieces, along with partners, along with an emphasis on Facebook. I would say email's been really valuable to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we had Mark Landsberg and actually Dan Roswig this morning talking about sort of the evolution of how you reach and connect with customers, and depending on Facebook is such a powerful network. At the same time, being dependent on it or Google can cause big potential issues. But email, talk more about email, because you're right. I mean, everybody says conventional wisdom, it's dead. Infobesity, you get too much information. Don't give me more emails. Why do you think email has worked for you? And what do you see? Why does it work for you? And where conventional wisdom is that it's not a good channel.
So I think maybe 2 or 3 things that we as a team, I feel like, maybe have done well. Some of it purposeful, some of it that we learned over time. I think we cared about design from the very beginning across Ozzy, and that extended to email. And not many people actually invest much time in the design of their emails. And I think that ultimately has made a difference in terms of people looking forward to it, people actually using it, people forwarding it to each other. So I feel like that has been a little bit of the piece of it. I'd say a second thing that we're only beginning to, I think, get really good at, but literally even in the last 6 months, we've seen a doubling, and we are on the verge of a tripling of open rates, tied in no small part to the subject lines. So it seems obvious, but we were late to doing meaningful subject line testing, and last Thursday we had our best day ever, and just really strong increases in open rates tied to that too.
Talk about the strategy, and I don't know how many people actually read Ozzy here. How many people get the Presidential Daily Brief? How many people is that the first thing you read in the morning? Okay.
This is a smart room. I know I'm in the presence of greatness. This is good. This is good.
So talk about how that works in terms of just connecting with people and getting the frequency and the kind of Ozzy addict.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So we have been doing surveys. In our first couple of years, we did surveys over the December holidays, and we started supplementing those written surveys with phone calls last year, where we would talk to, call it 30 or 40 people a month. And so we talked to 24-year-old Nikos Bellis, who's a YouTube filmmaker down in Southern California. We talked to Kim Wilson, who's a professor at Tufts. We talked to Oliver Bennett, who's an 80-year-old former air traffic controller in East Cork, Ireland. And so we ended up hearing a lot more from people about why they were making it a part of their day. With the Presidential Daily Brief in particular, I think weirdly the fact that we defined it tightly, and we only give you 10 things and not 25, and it's not endless scroll, and so it feels like you can actually complete it, I think is important. A second word that we thought early on was going to matter, and then we forgot how much it mattered until we talked to people, and they all kept using the same word, quick, that they liked that it was quick, that they could, one guy named Mitch Downey, who's a PhD student at UCSD, who I wish I could use his exact name, PhD in economics, and how did he frame it? He said, He said, price adjusted, it's the most efficient way to spend my time every day. He said, I get 60 minutes worth of value in 3 minutes. And so I think that that's been a piece of it too, because if you look at, for example, the New York Times has come on with their own daily briefing, or places like Quartz and others have them. And in many cases, this may sound simple, but they don't number them, and it's kind of an endless number. And for some people, that's great, but I think for a lot of people that feels like something I don't complete. Whereas we keep hearing from a lot of people that I love that it feels comprehensive, that it's colorful, that it's quick, and that I feel like I got through it all. And so I think that's a piece of what's
maybe it's
worked.
obvious, but for those who don't know the history of the Presidential Daily Brief, the whole idea is modeled after what the President of the United States gets every morning for the kind of the briefing of what's going on. And to date, you've had former President Clinton, who you're able to change national law through your interview.
Right.
You had Tony Blair, you had Jeb Bush, Condoleezza Rice. What kind of impact has that had in terms of driving credibility, awareness, and ability to kind of get people to say, hey, Ozzy's different than the typical or a lot of the different media competition that you have?
I think it's been enormously valuable. I think validators, whether they have been these guest editors who we ask them what were the 10 most interesting stories to you that last week, and so you be the guest editor, or whether we've had partners like NPR and CNN and others, I think that's been enormously valuable and an enormously valuable validator. And not only with people who don't know them, but even within their own networks. That I think Bill Gates putting on not only his Facebook feed and his Twitter feed, but also forwarding it to a handful of people is way more valuable. That's a way more valuable way for Reid Hoffman to find out about Ozzy than for me to simply hope to hit him on LinkedIn or what have you. So I think it's been incredibly helpful for people to say that other people are taking it seriously in a really interesting way. There's a fun thing that we haven't announced publicly yet, but I will tell you guys, which I think will further extend this kind of fun and interactivity and validation.
So get your Twitter accounts out.
Or not.
Or not, sorry.
How many of you guys are House of Cards fans? Any House of Cards fan? So the way they're going to kick off season 5 is we're going to have Frank Underwood guest edit the Presidential Daily Brief on Ozzy. It's going to be awesome.
It's very cool.
I hope you guys will enjoy that. And so we're also beginning to kind of think creatively about this venue as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just make an editorial just as an observation. Kind of what can you learn from the success of Carlos and Ozzy? It's finding these, these kind of shoot the moon type of ask, but being able to get it because it has so much impact in terms of the business. I mean, I think you've spent an enormous amount of effort and working your friends and network to get to a Bill Gates to be able to have them look at this to actually do this. Yeah. And so figuring out where the real leverage points to create that kind of impact has been something that has been very critical, I think, to what you've been able to do.
Yeah, one of the other things I think that we often say as well is we want to be easy to work with. Because we know that if we ask Condi Rice to do something, we know that we're one of 1,000 people that week who asked her to do something. Or we know if we are trying to schedule something with Kevin Spacey, we know that we're not the only ones who are asking him to do something that week. And so across the board, and we're not perfect at it yet, but we want to be really easy to work with. And we want it to be such that if we ask Mitt Romney to sit down for an interview for our new TV show, we want him to be able to hear from Karl Rove and Jeb Bush and a whole series of other people that Ozzy was really easy to work with, that it came together quickly. They met me when I wanted, where I wanted. They got in and they got out. That was really easy to work with. So we, I don't know if any of you guys flew JetBlue in their early days. Anyone here was a JetBlue flyer in the early days? I remember the reason I fell in love with JetBlue was not just the snacks and the TV, but I was late. I was going to miss something really important. I went to a United desk. I got there 55 minutes before the flight, and I'm not making this up. Literally, the desk agent spent 10 minutes, for the most part, explaining to me that I should have been there an hour before. And I was like, I completely hear what you're saying, but we literally are burning time, and you probably could help me make that. And so I headed over to the JetBlue desk. I had 25 minutes still left. This is post 9/11, so you guys all appreciate how hard this was. It was post 9/11, and they not only got me on the flight, but they walked me down to the line, walked me through, got me on, called ahead, made sure I got there. And so that's always in my mind when I'm thinking about any of these partners that we're thinking about working with, whether it's PBS or the one that I'm most proud of that my partner Samir just struck after about 9 months plus worth of work is, for the first time ever, the New York Times is doing a joint email with someone that's not themselves, and they're doing it with us. And it just started 2 or 3 weeks ago. I bet you we had at least 30 meetings ahead of that. They probably kept saying they were going to start it a million times and didn't. And when they finally started, we made it easy. We made sure that it was a huge success for them. We were really clear about asking them what success looked like to them up front so that we could beat it. And we didn't want to just inch over it. I think we ended up doing 4.5 times the amount of traffic they expected from it, and such that we now, next month, are going to launch a second dedicated email that the two of us will do together, specifically dedicated towards college students. And had Samir and had the team not done that, that's the kind of thing that, you know, we could have muddled along forever. And they've got a million other things to do, and they could call it an experiment and it never go anywhere. So we always think about trying to grow the partnerships as well and not allowing them to remain static or fizzle out.
Yeah, you talk about United Airlines. I think United Airlines has been the gift to all the other airlines for getting new customers.
Yeah.
But in any event, I digress.
Yeah.
Talk about the Aussie Fest and the 16 for 16 and how you think about that in developing both brand and creating Asiatics.
Yeah. So I think our hope in part was that, you know, we know there are a lot of great news choices. You can go to BBC, you can go to Twitter, you can go to Mashable, you can go to Fox, you can go to ABC, CNN, Mike, you can go to a number of places. But even in a crowded space, our hope was to do something a little bit akin to what happened at Apple 16 or 17 years ago, or what happened at HBO 13 or 14 years ago, which is, you know, when Jobs returned to Apple, it's not as though there weren't a ton of different computer choices, right? HP, Compaq, Dell, Gateway, on and on and on. But they became, for a lot of us, not the only place we'd ever get a computer from, but it became our first and our favorite, right? And I think there was a moment pre-Netflix and pre-FX and pre-Showtime when HBO wasn't the only place you'd go, but like if someone gave you a bunch of choices, it would have unequivocally been, for many of us, our first and favorite. And so for Ozzy, that started as our initial ambition, which is, could we over time become not the only place that curious and creative people went for their news, but could we become what I call their first and their favorite, right? They still may go to the Times, they still may go to USA Today, they still may go to a bunch of places, but that's what we were trying to earn. And our thought, as Mike knows, is that if we earn that well enough and did it not just for a large number of people, but for addicts, that there might be kind of natural, organic, additional opportunities to get more deeply integrated with people, right? So Apple earned the computer opportunity and moved to doing phones and music, and who knows what else is coming in terms of TVs and cars and the rest. And so we similarly thought, if we do a good enough job, some of our people are going to want to get together sometimes and not just online. And so maybe we can be the kind of place that does events that people look forward to, right? And so we partnered with the city of New York, and this July we'll do something that we hope will not only become a signature event. We'd like to say we want it to become the next South by Southwest, but that it'll really become a place where Ozzy will no longer be theory, but it'll come alive in the way that Apple stores, you know, made Apple feel more real, you know, more tangible. And so we think about that. And then, as Mike said, we just, you know, we watch with admiration for years as book publishers would say, I've got really great content, and maybe there's an additional way that I can monetize it. Maybe I can turn my book into a movie. And then in the last couple of years, you saw digital magazines like Vice say, well, an analogous idea is to take my best article series and turn those into TV shows, right? And they turned that into a big business. And so we wanted to do the same thing. We knew it would take a long time, but one of the things that I heard from the Vice CEO this summer, he said, Carlos, most people don't realize we're 21 years old. And for a lot of people, we're only 4 or 5 years old. For a lot of people, they only think about us once we got that TV show on HBO. And so it wasn't just a revenue stream. For a lot of people, it was their introduction to Vice. And so we think of the TV show, which we were going to launch on September 6th on Tuesday nights at 8. I hope everyone will be watching. But we think about that, Mike, is for a lot of people, that'll be the first time they meet Ozzy. And maybe if they enjoy Ozzy there, maybe they'll enjoy us in person at Ozzy Fest. Maybe they'll come online, sign up for email, etc.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll get some quick questions from the audience. But just last, because media, and this is different than, it's not, in some ways it's relevant for the whole, how you get customers, keep customers, develop your brand, keep loyalty. But in some ways it's different. Just your perspective with what's going on in media. We're going through a sea change, right, in terms of the next phase, the over the top delivery and so forth, and these new emerging brands offerings come out. How do you see that playing out, and how does Ozzy fit into that new landscape?
Yeah. Well, it's Mike's being modest, but when we first came to see the GSV team, the media space wasn't a hot one. Jeff Bezos hadn't bought the Washington Post yet. Time Warner was trying to get rid of its magazine. CNN was struggling. Some of you may recall that Newsweek had shut down briefly. Even the New York Times was borrowing money from Carlos Slim. So it wasn't immediately obvious to some people that this was the best space to be in. And
I didn't know that was going on.
That was on the last slide. So, but to his credit and to a lot of and to a handful of people's credit, they were able to see the fact that the industry was struggling meant that there was also an opportunity for reimagination, right, and for reinvention. And so that started to happen over the last couple of years, and even in the last 12 months, you've seen a handful of people become billion-dollar companies. So Vox, BuzzFeed, and Vice all have commanded fairly substantial valuations. Vice probably valued at double the New York Times today, just to give you a data point. And so I think it's in some ways a much more exciting time because both consumers and I think investors and potential partners are open to new players in a meaningful way. On the other hand, I do think that we may be coming to the tail end of that boom, and I think there's going to be a thinning out. And you see some companies getting bought, some companies effectively shutting down, some companies kind of running out of gas and moving into a smaller lane. And so I'm excited for Ozzy. I still think that there hasn't been an HBO, an Apple, a Tesla in this space. I don't think that any of the players that currently are the leaders are likely to become that. Doesn't mean they haven't become something special, but I don't think they're going to become that. And so I think particularly over the next 2 to 3 years, I think the money is there both from a handful of investors and, frankly, these days from advertisers and other partners like TV groups, right, that are interested in buying Ozzy stories. Just yesterday, we got approached by a major studio for our first movie based on one of the pieces that we did, one of the flashback pieces, interestingly enough. So I think it's a good time, and it'll be interesting, in particular in this space, to see if a company like Vice ends up going public in the next year, and if it becomes a successful, healthy company, does that catalyze even more opportunity for some of us, or does it make some people feel like, the winners have been decided and there's not as much space for new people to enter?
Questions?
Thank you, Carlos.
Amen. Yeah.
How do you get, just this is more pragmatic question, the idea flow within Ozzy's got to be enormous. Yeah. Practically speaking, how do you track all the ideas, the follow-up, or the threads therefrom? It's pretty amazing to me how very the content is. How do you track that?
So we have a couple software systems that we use, and which have been key to that and key to kind of tracking those ideas. And I think we have a pretty good process that's built up. One of the things that I would say, broadly speaking, is that when I think about Ozzy's early success, and it's only early success, so who knows if it'll be long-term success, but I think probably the most surprising thing to me is how important being organized has been. I know that so often when you think of startups, you associate it with chaos, and you assume that that just is part of what comes with it. But I think the fact, and I know this sounds simplistic, but the fact that we use spreadsheets and we have agendas and we have follow-ups and we have timelines and that we stick to them and that we manage those are incredibly important. But we are, on the editorial side, managing both ideas from our internal team. We're managing ideas from, which kind of 20 or 30 editorial people. We've got, I would say, probably 50 regular freelancers who participate in one way or another across probably 30 countries. And then we've got a larger set of people who lob ideas in, or we sit down with occasionally. One of our editors earlier this week sat down with the president of the Ford Foundation, second largest foundation, ended up with 12 great ideas for stories. And so putting all that together, prioritizing it, all happens in a calendaring system that we go over every day, but in a serious way every 3 weeks.
Any more questions? Time for one more. Two more. I'll give you Kurt, too.
Promising career as a lawyer. How'd you get into this?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. So my grandmother's from Jackson, Mississippi. Jeanette Anderson Thomas, was born in 1902 or 02, as she used to say, and she always wanted one of her grandchildren, had 19 of them, 7 kids, 19 grandkids, always wanted one of us to become a lawyer, and so went to law school. She came out here to visit me while I was in law school, and she came for graduation, at the time, she was 93 at the point, and so, but she was sending email a couple of years later, and she was very lively, and she said, "So, son, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Grandma, I'm going to become a consultant." And
For McKinsey.
And she paused, and she waited a minute, and she said, "So, son, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to become a consultant." And what I didn't realize at the time was this was just after the recession of the early 90s, and so when she heard consultant, she thought unemployed. And so she turned to my mother and she said, "I thought the boy always did well. Don't we know anyone?" And so my mom made me go get my offer letter and walk her through a brochure of McKinsey and explain to her. And in fact, unbeknownst to me, my mom later told me she sent her a copy of my first paycheck just so she could see, no, he really does have a job. So, and I took the bar for my grandmother, just so that would happen. So I really met the McKinsey folks while I was in law school. They were at a moment when they were thinking not only about great people from business school, but medical school, military officers, PhD students. And so it turned out for me to be a great place to kind of learn business, and plus, I'm sure, as one of our board members, Larry Sonsini, would say, there are better lawyers than Carlos. So,
Kurt.
yeah.
You mentioned the success of the NPR deal.
Yeah.
Can you maybe reference one parallel deal that you were pursuing at the time that didn't work out, and what you learned from that?
Yeah, so I'd kind of rather not say their name, but there's a large media company based in and around D.C., multi-billion-dollar company, super good people, love the CEO, big fan of ours. He was in the midst of reinventing who they were, and so saw what we did at NPR and thought, man, I'd love to have those guys work with us. And so he set up meetings with his top 3 or 4 people. We met with them. We did all the stuff that we do for every one of our partnerships. We prepped. We figured out how we could work. We ultimately struck a deal as to what we would do together, and we worked it hard, and we were really attentive at the beginning. And in the end, God bless them, they just moved so slowly, just so slowly. Everything took longer. There was no sense of what more we could do. Everything felt like a fight that I think at that time we actually felt like it'd almost be like a marathon runner training with someone who just wants to sit on the couch. It's just like not going to be good for you, and it's going to end up just messing you up. And so we respectfully ended up saying, we don't think that we're mature enough yet to be a good partner for you. And we wonder if we can, so that we don't damage relationship, we wonder if we can step down now. And once we've matured and done the things that you need us to do in order to be a good partner for you, we wonder if we can come back to you in a year or two when we think that we're in a better place. And so I think that ended up being the right answer for us. Because I think that we would have become frustrated. They probably would have felt like we were pushing too hard, and no one would have been happy, and it would have just taken too much work to do that. So we have stepped down from people like that. And I generally say that if I try and set the launch date for these things, once people finally agree, which sometimes takes 3, 6, 9 months, once they finally agree, I try and set the launch date for within a month. because if you don't set it for within a month with a clear timeline and a clear get going, you and I both know that something always comes up. You know, vacation, some tough event, business changes, personnel changes. So we try and be really deliberate about that.
You know, one thing, working with Carlos at that moment that I thought was really impressive and a lesson for me is knowing when to say no. Whether you're a small company and a big company isn't just good because it's big, but really having the confidence at your CEO level to know that this isn't right for us, even though it makes all sorts of sense in all these other ways. That ability to triage the resources you've got, the staff you've got against the partnerships that are going to give you return, I thought was a big lesson for me.
A critical thing to do, because we have a small team in the end. You can only do so many things really well. That's very true.
Carlos, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.